You're watching the October edition of Ask Parse Anything. This month we tried a couple of new things. We hope you enjoy them, and let's get right to it. Here we are with Fosco, one of our developer advocates, and this time around we've got some great questions to answer, as well as some special segments that are new to the Ask Parse Anything video series. Let's get right to it. So our first question, Fosco, is how do I secure Parse API keys in mobile apps? From Amir.
Okay, well, Amir, Parse API keys are public information. It's your application ID and your client key, and those are intended to be public. Like with our JavaScript SDK, you'll have your app ID and your JavaScript key, and they'll be in the source code for the HTML or however you build your site, and people can get that information. It's important to know that those are public and you don't need to protect those. It's the master key that you never want to put anywhere else, and you should not implement the master key in a client-side application.
From Eric, why don't you propose to the community to translate the docs, #French?
Well, that's a pretty good question, Eric, and we could do that. So right now, we will propose to the community. Our docs are open source. They're on GitHub under Parse Platform/docs. And we would love it if somebody would take a crack at translating the docs to French or any other language. So join in our open source community and send in a pull request. Thanks.
Will objects be able to support multiple geopoints, or the ability to allow nearest location queries of objects with relations to multiple geopoints?
Unfortunately, we can't really do that in one single object. So this is an issue with the underlying database. And you can put multiple geopoints, technically you could put multiple geopoints in a single object, but we don't allow you to because only one of them can be indexed. And because only one of them can be indexed, then you could only efficiently sort on one. So really the workaround for this would be to keep a separate set of locations. So if you have one type of entity and it has 10 locations, have kind of like a link table where the locations are individually and link them back to the entity. So then when you do your search on nearest location with multiple geopoints, search on that lower level set of locations that each have one geopoint per object, and then link back to that main type of entity.
And from Joel, as a successful tech company dealing with many software engineers and development environments, what tools have you found that work well for you to seamlessly allow for continuous development and flexibility for different teams to work easily?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big issue, especially in big companies. And unfortunately, I mean, it winds up being you build your own custom tools for your custom situation, because it's really hard for somebody to create something that works for everybody. So, I mean, here at Facebook and partially at Parse, we have a lot of internal tools. In the open source area, we have these GitHub bots that operate on our GitHub repository, respond to issues and pull requests. Like Facebook has a license agreement you need to sign to be a contributor. So if the bot detects that you haven't signed it, it'll post and ask you to sign it. Things like that eliminate manual intervention. We have lots of stuff for dealing with pull requests and code reviews. We have things that integrate with our internal chat systems that will respond, like tell us things that are happening elsewhere, or we could even give commands in chat that will then change other things externally. Lots of stuff like that, but it winds up being very custom for the use case. And so I'm sorry there's not more I can really share on that.
But what's interesting is sometimes we've seen companies use Parse to build internal tools, right? So Venmo built a couple internal tools as well.
Yeah, I mean, Parse is a great tool for that reason, because you could very quickly prototype some interaction. So you have something going on and you want to try and make it faster. Parse is a great platform for just putting together internal tools. Absolutely.
What are the best practices for designing unit tests for apps that use Parse? So, for example, one might need to delete a user generated during the test in the teardown of the test class.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's one of the things that is more difficult to do on Parse. It's possible to have like a test app that you do that in, and you can write code that goes and does these teardowns to remove things. So like the PHP SDK that we have open sourced does this. There is like an integration test that will go all the way to the Parse API and back and do all of this stuff. And it does go through and remove the old collections after, like any test objects that have been created. It will go through and delete all that. The one real obstacle there that you can't really test is the schema. Like if you create a class and you create a column and you've put data in it, so the type is set, like if you had a string column, and you could delete all the objects, but we don't let you like delete the class itself, so that will be set. So as long as you're aware of that the schema is locked and your tests can't really change that part, you can, do these unit tests. You just have to use a separate app, but they have to also be kind of like integration tests. Like they have to go all the way through the process.
Okay, gotcha. Now we have a couple questions about WatchOS 2. So first from Geo, when will you be updating the Parse SDK to support WatchOS 2, and what do you suggest we do in the meantime? And the second question is, when will you release a sample project with native integration?
So those things will happen at the same time.
Oh.
And Nikita, who was in last month's Ask Parse Anything, is actively working on this. It's very close to being ready, so we should see that very soon. I would also say that you could check out the open source iOS and SDK repositories on GitHub, because it's quite likely that it will land there first.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So from Jose, local storage support for the JavaScript SDK. When? And love you guys. Well, we love you too. Thank you for that.
Yes, thank you, Jose. So this is something that we're looking at. It's quite likely that it will be in relation to Parse React and some of this interesting stuff coming out of Facebook open source like Relay and GraphQL. So, I mean, it's still kind of at like an early stage of how do we want to implement this? Do we want to implement this? So if this is something that you're really interested in out there, we'd love to hear more requests for it so we know how desired it is. But I think it's going to be in that realm of like Parse React and those types of technologies. So we'll see what comes.
The iOS API documentation is written for Objective-C. Is there an equivalent for Swift, and if so, where can it be found?
Okay, so the API reference, no. I mean, the reason is because this is auto-generated from the source code, and the Parse SDK is currently written in Objective-C. We can't really do that in Swift. We try and do our best with the documentation in Swift and other code examples that we use elsewhere. But if you have specific questions, maybe you can get in touch with us some other way, and we can try and help if you're having an issue translating some set of Objective-C to Swift. That's also a good thing to ask on like Stack Overflow or something like that.
From my Android code, I send a map of phone numbers into my Cloud Code function. So from there, I loop over the map of numbers and use the Twilio module to send an SMS to each phone number. So does this count as one API request only?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
So that's only one. I mean, you're calling the function once with an array, that uses up an API request. You're allowed to, in your Cloud function, make multiple HTTP requests outbound, and those don't count as API requests. The thing to look for there is that you still have a limited time. So if you're using a Cloud function and on hosted Cloud Code, you have 15 seconds. So you want to be careful that you're not doing too much. But yeah, that would only be one API request.
I log into my Parse account using my password that I keep very secret, and which gives me full access to my customer's database. Is it possible to use two-factor authentication?
So what we do here at Parse is we link our accounts with Facebook. And we all have two-factor authentication on our Facebook accounts. And so that's how we get two-factor auth. that's what I would recommend you to do as well. Just because it doesn't seem like we will have that anytime soon, and I think the reason is because we all have it through, linking to Facebook. So there's just not a lot. There's not a lot of like fire under that issue.
I need to upload one or more images on Parse, so they're stored as an array. So how can I remove an image from an array or add new images to that images array?
Okay, well, I would not recommend using an array of images. The way that we store files, you upload the file, you get this parse file object, and then you store that in the database. It's best to put that in its own column by itself. It might be technically possible to put the files in an array object, but then adding and removing them might be a little strange. I would recommend, if you really need to do this, maybe you could use another file upload system and then store like the URLs in Parse in an array.
Oh.
I think that would be like probably the most acceptable workaround there.
Oh, fantastic. Now we're going to jump into a new and very special segment of ours called Cloud Code Corner, aka If I Were You. So it's interesting, this time we got a lot of questions about cloud code, and maybe Fosco, you can tell us a little bit more as to why we're doing this segment.
Okay, yeah. So, we get a lot of questions and feature requests for things that you can like already do with a little bit of programming effort. Parse makes it very easy to get started and can support many ideas all the way through. But we, as developers, we're a creative bunch. We come up with advanced use cases. We figure out clever ways of using the tools available to us. And, we're always like evolving the state of the art. So here are some of the questions that came through this month, like really just relating to different stuff with cloud code features and functionality.
Awesome. We're just going to run through these, and then Fosco will tell us a little bit more about his approach to it right after. So the first question we had came from William, and his question was, any plans on opening up Cloud Code to support Node modules? Another one from Liam, thanks and congrats on open sourcing the SDKs. In the vein of improving developer experience, have you considered improving the logging, backup, and testing systems? Are you planning to move from Backbone to React? Lots of the earlier examples seem stale, and debugging code is pretty laborious. Have you ever tried to debug a cloud code function with 5 or more nested promises? What's the plan here? From Vic, is there a way to generate a reset password link without sending an email automatically? I'd like to handle the delivery on my own, plus customize the HTML and CSS when the email is sent out. Another related question is, in forgot password, how can I display a button in an email instead of the parse link? And from Dan, how do I set up an Express app in Cloud Code to use the handlebars template system instead of EJS? From Carl, does Parse plan to implement multi-part form encoding for parse.cloud.http request? And the last one from Keith, a growing number of REST APIs require the patch verb. So are there any plans to add support for this HTTP verb to parse.cloud.http request?
Okay. It would be amazing if Parse could support every single one of these use cases, but it's just not possible. If we did, there'd be another list just as long with slightly different requests every month. Mm-hmm. But we don't prevent you from accomplishing any of this. It just takes some custom development on your part. So many customers want a full Node.js environment or to use another language. There are entire ecosystems of libraries and integrations you might want to access. So you can do all of this. Recently we launched this partnership with Heroku. Mm-hmm. Before that, we had launched some webhooks examples showing like local testing. Before that, we did the hooks API, so you could configure your webhooks. Before that, we did the webhooks itself. Mm-hmm. Right? So as we're getting to this place, like right now, it's very, very easy to get a full Node.js environment with access to every single NPM module, to update your HTTP calls to other systems to use the patch verb or to do multi-part form encoding, being able to access different libraries that are already out there that will help you do these things. And all you have to do is just put it like on Heroku or use some other hosting provider for server infrastructure, and then configure it all through webhooks. And we've tried to help make this easy by creating scripts that will help you do that. So one of my coworkers, Nikita, was asking me, why are we focusing on Node.js? Like why, there's all these other languages. Why are we doing this stuff with Node? So I want to shout out to Nikita there that, I want to tell everybody you can use pretty much any language you want in the world. It's just that we can make it especially easy with Node because of how our hosted Cloud Code product has existed. So if you've used Cloud Code, you can create database triggers with part of the Parse SDK.
Oh, wow.
But it's part of the SDK that only existed in Cloud Code. So basically, when we announce the local testing thing through webhooks, we have a version of that you can run, and it's a Node module in NPM. And so you could take your existing Cloud Code that runs on Parse, and with add one line at the top, and now you can run this on Heroku or somewhere else, without having to rewrite all of that functionality. So a lot of that stuff can be covered just by using webhooks with Heroku or some other server provider. In some cases, if it's a feature that we offer that just doesn't work exactly how you want it to, it might sound weird, but to me, the best way to do this is just pretend we don't offer that feature at all, and then build it with the primitives that we offer. So password resets and custom email validation. Say we don't have it, right? So you ask the user for their email, you have a cloud function, you call that cloud function with that email address. You use one of the email modules to send an email to this person. Now you have full control, right? And you can create an HTML email with CSS and images and whatever you need. Then put a link in that email to a Parse hosted link, basically. When they click that, you get the code that has some token in it. You can validate that in the database. You could ask them for a new password and then reset it, overwrite it with the master key. Or this could have been an email validation thing, so you can then mark their record as being validated for email. A lot of that stuff, just pretend we didn't do it, and now you can build it exactly the way that you want. And sometimes that's really the only way to get exactly what you want. So many of the decisions we make and the limitations that we have to impose are because if we're building a feature and we're maintaining it and we're hosting it, it has to be able to scale to support hundreds of thousands of applications and not affect any of the other apps that are all running at the same time. I've been there right with you asking the same questions. There's a ton of features that I've wanted to have in hosted Cloud Code that just aren't feasible for us to do. But the silver lining there is that you're not dependent just upon what we can provide for you in our hosted environment. With webhooks and our Heroku partnership, or really any other server provider, you can extend all of this stuff, and you can just really build much, much better things in the future. So I think we're at a great spot. The future of Parse and Cloud Code with webhooks and Heroku is super awesome.
So now we're going to jump into another special new segment called Did You Know? We're going to share a couple of things that you might not have realized or may have missed in all the things that we've been launching lately. So Fosco, take it away.
All right. So this is something about webhooks and Cloud Code by itself. It was something that I just learned. So it was a TIL for me. Today I learned. Did you know that you'll get a before save or before delete event triggered, even if the requesting user has no write access to the object, according to ACL permissions? Just something to think about if your before save or your before delete does anything that causes any side effects. So something I should have mentioned earlier is that with webhooks, you can extend your time constraints from 3 seconds on all database triggers and 15 seconds on cloud functions to 30 seconds for any of those things. Plus, you can continue processing on your server after you've already responded to the request, which you can't do on hosted cloud code. And lastly, our iOS SDK uses something called single instance mode. So if you have a copy of a specific object, we'll just call it X, and somewhere else or somewhere later you issue a query and object X is included in the response, and maybe it has some new data, the other object X that you had before will be updated. Really because they are the exact same object. Like if you issued 3 queries and they all happen to return this one object X, you don't actually have 3 copies of object X, like in memory, you have just one. So I thought that was interesting.
Oh, awesome. And our last Did You Know for this month is that actually some of our team is going to be in Europe next month. So the best way to figure out how you can meet us in person is actually visiting the Parse blog. We always log where our team will be speaking or hanging out or any events we'll be attending. So we will be in multiple cities in Europe, and we would love to meet you in person if you're around. Thanks for watching this month's Ask Parse Anything. We hope you enjoyed Cloud Code Corner and Did You Know, and we hope you learned something new. Keep the great questions coming. We're going to be back next month, but in the meantime, check out this coupon code for a little bit something special for you, and we'll see you next month.